Jake Paul dropped that he was gonna fight Nate Diaz. So Jake Paul's pulling back from boxing, pulling back from Tommy Fury, going back to his roots, kind of saying like, all right, Tommy Fury's 23. He looked a lot better than me. He looked more skilled than me as far as a boxer. Jake Paul definitely looked like he was a star and able to impose his will, but I feel like technically Tommy Fury definitely looked like the better boxer. And Jake Paul being 26, I don't know how much better he can get to actually compete with some boxers. And you can make the argument like, well, look at this boxer at the beginning of their career. It's like, yeah, they were like 18 when
Right.
they started boxing,
Yep.
18, 19, 20. And you're like really 24, 25, 26 when you start breaking on the scene. But what did work for Jake Paul, what he could market, was him fighting UFC fighters and then him kind of being the retirement for UFC fighters and then getting them that one last bag when they're kind of tuned out of UFC. And then I feel like Nate Diaz is the perfect matchup for Jake Paul, right? Because Nate Diaz has the personality. Shane Gillis was talking about going to party with Diaz. He's like, I walk in the room and Nate Diaz is shotgunning a seltzer. And then we go
Nice.
outside and there's like this big jack dude. And then Nate Diaz is like, oh, are you talking shit, man? And then the dude's buddies jump Nate Diaz. They're holding him. And then Nate Diaz just front kicks him. And then the dude's just wobbling there, like with all that muscle. And then Nate Diaz is like, oh, I think that guy was trying to talk shit. And then him and his brother, Nick Diaz, swim to Alcatraz and
Okay.
back.
Okay.
So he's an elite athlete. He loves getting hit. So Jake Paul's going to be able to get his shots off on Nate Diaz, and Diaz has the chin to take it, and he has the personality, and he's kind of a villain like Jake Paul. It's kind of like Jake Paul is starting his hero arc almost because now he's fighting another villain type guy. I feel like it's definitely going to be his biggest fight because I feel like Nate Diaz has more personality than Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, which were two biggest fights. And then I honestly forgot that he fought Anderson Silva, but I feel like it's going to be a good fight. But Jake's probably going to win because Nate Diaz usually fights at like 170, 155, and this fight's going to be at 180.
Yeah. If I had to pick, I like this for a few reasons. For one, big ticket item, Nate Diaz, Jake Paul. Nate Diaz is more than capable of generating massive numbers for pay-per-view. I also think, like you mentioned, you alluded to this earlier with like kind of taking a step back from the boxers and going back into the UFC. I think Jake Paul matches up better with UFC fighters than he
Right.
does with boxers. Boxers, they begin at an early age. UFC fighters, they can kind of, not that they're not more than capable of fighting, but they kind of have a different development than some of these boxers start as early as like 12, like
Yeah.
Tommy Fury did.
It's just a different movement at that point.
Different movement, different training, different regimens. But I think this is a fight that he can more than likely win. Obviously, the numbers are going to be there no matter what. Jake Paul's a big ticket item. And I think this is a better matchup for him as well. He's going to take his shots. If he can be better defensively in this game as he was compared to Tommy Fury got some knocks on him, I think Jake Paul's going to win this fight.
Yeah, and I think he's going to win this one. I think it's good for publicity. I do want to see some good fights underneath him. Maybe we get Le'Veon Bell in there, even though Le'Veon Bell has a second fight coming up soon after
Oh, God.
unfortunately beating Adrian Peterson. But
God, I wanted Adrian Peterson to win so bad.
yeah, but I'm excited. I feel like Jake Paul, it's definitely good for boxing. I don't like when people are like, oh, it's not good for the sport. It's like it's bringing
Fantastic
more
for the sport.
attention to a sport where it's kind of been a dying sport and the UFC's been taking over. When the UFC can roll out some pretty epic cards like they did with Israel Adesanya and then Masvidal on the same card, which is one of the biggest fights of the year. And then they kind of own Saturday night now at this point. It's like college football and the UFC now. So you have a big sport where you have Joe Rogan, Dana White, you just partnered with the WWE. And then now when your players are kind of getting older, they can go fight Jake Paul. They get more money than they ever have made in the UFC in their life. So solid 50, $60 million payout for them sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's a win-win for everybody. Jake Paul gets his recognition, he gets his money, they get their money. and you get a good fight most of the time.
Yeah, and there's gonna be good publicity. Like it's gonna be all over podcasts. People are gonna be talking about it. People are gonna be like, "Hey, Joe Rogan, you're the UFC guy. What do you think of Nate Diaz and Jake Paul?" And then Joe's like, "Oh, Nate Diaz, he's like a good fighter, but like I actually think Jake Paul's a legit fighter." And then you get like Brendan Schaub and Brian Callen talking about it, and then Burt Kreischer will be like, "Yeah, I remember the time when I said Tom and I were gonna jump Nate Diaz, and he didn't take it very funny." But I feel like this will be a good fight. Good for Jake Paul. It's gonna get another notch under his belt, but it kind of feels like he's sliding back into the gimmick. So I am very curious to see how this fight does because people are like, okay, he tried it versus a boxer, and then he's kind of running back into the UFC fight lane. It'd kind of be like, yeah, it's just like if this fails, it's a pretty bad look for him because people kind of just are like, all right, that was a cool thing. Now it's time for you to evolve again. Like I was
Right.
watching a video of Patrick Bet David. He's like, the people who are successful, like who are entertainers, are the ones who can evolve. You can move on to different things. You can change your style every few years. Like eventually, people are gonna get tired of seeing Jake Paul fighting UFC fighters. So it's like, I don't think he's gonna be able to make a long career out of it. So I think this thing probably only has another 2, 3 years in the tank.